Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Speaker's fine.
Mr. Speaker's fine. Excellent. Okay, I'll elevate you. It is appropriate that today, as we are marking the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the Howard government, that we do note one of its most critical failures. And I think it's important that we note it because it does not seem to be understood by members of the current government just precisely what this failure was and how profoundly that has affected us as a country. And of course I talk of the absolute failure to prepare the ground or indeed take any action on the establishing of a broadband network in this country. Now, it is quite extraordinary that after many years in government, 11 years in government, that we still had the Prime Minister saying, Prime Minister John Howard saying, when asked what he was going to do about the provision of a broadband network, of the fundamental digital infrastructure that we need for the modern economy, that he argued that his comment was, well, we'll wait and see. So 11 years into the job, he was still waiting and seeing what he was indeed going to— Sorry, I'll wait. Sorry, a second. So 11 years into the job, he was still waiting and seeing what he will do for what the government of the day would do to establish a broadband network. So when the members opposite get up in this chamber, as they do day after day, and say, oh, look at what we've achieved, look at what we've achieved during our 2.5 years in government, and this is what you achieved in 6 years, I say to them, think about this. Think about the fact that when we took government towards the end of 2007, it was ground zero. Nothing, absolutely nothing had been done to prepare the way for the development of the broadband network. That the government had been sitting back there completely and utterly unaware of how absolutely critical this was. They had poisonous relationships with Telstra, and I don't entirely blame them for that. I think the three amigos in charge of Telstra at the time were very poor choices by that company, and they were taking the company in the wrong direction. But what we had from the Howard government is that they rejected, and probably quite properly, time and time again, the proposals that were coming from Telstra to rebuild the network. The proposals that came in 2005 when Telstra was telling the government and telling all to see that it was 11 minutes to midnight for the copper network, that it was on its last legs. What did they do? Nothing. They just waited. We'll wait and see, and we'll wait till the next offer. And the next offer came back, and it wasn't much better. It offered, I think it was offering about 8 megabytes, but only in the five major cities. Very little, virtually no penetration outside those 5 major cities. So these offers, of course, were entirely unacceptable. But then you needed to do something else. It is not a response of a responsible government to just say, well, we don't like that stuff coming from Telstra, that's nonsense, that's not good enough, we don't want to give Telstra the monopoly, but we'll just continue to wait and see if some other private sector proposal comes up. We're not going to take any agency here. We're not going to take responsibility. We're not going to be recognising that this nation is behind all of our competitors. We're not going to have that imagination to understand that business in the future will be fundamentally reliable on sound and fast digital infrastructure. We're just going to wait and see. We're going to be like some sort of inert blob that waits to see if someone other than Telstra is going to bowl up a successful proposal to us. So I say to those members opposite, do not come into this House. Do not come into this House and say you had 6 years. We came into this place and there was not a thing done to establish a broadband network. There was not one piece of infrastructure that was in place that we could build on. We had to start it. Now, of course, it was very complex. It was going to be a joint private-public sector venture. And we did have, because we were starting, as I said, from ground zero, there were a few false starts. The first process, it didn't work, but that is not a reflection on poor planning. It was that we were trying to get this thing underway. We tried a particular proposal and that didn't work, and so then we came back to the drawing board very promptly the following year and established and made the determination that we were going to be establishing the NBN Co. And we also at the same time took the proper decision that what we were going to build was infrastructure for the 21st century, not infrastructure for the 20th century, because we were nudging up to the turn of that new century, and we totally needed to have a modern technology. So we made the decision that we would go with fibre to the premise as the fundamental proposition. Now, that is still very much the right proposal. And what we have seen with the government, we had under the leadership of the member for Warringah, when he was leader of the opposition, he, like John Howard, was very much of the Howard mode, that he just wanted to wait and see if some private sector company would come up. And the new Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, had to persuade him at least to let them go with broadband or broadband light, which is based on fibre to the node, an increasingly discredited response. And can I just take the members through to the report that came out in September last year, where we're looking at global broadband rankings, because what we should be comparing ourselves to is not what we should be comparing our performance to is not what we had 10 years ago. What we have to be doing, as the member Griffith says, we have to be looking at how we are ranking against the rest of the world. Now, this is not like going to the gym, where your gym instructor tells you, don't worry about what anyone else is doing, you just focus on what you're doing and whether or not you've done better than you were doing before. Now, we don't want that, is not an appropriate response here. And that seems to be a response to the government, we're doing better than we were before. But we are now, this is not in the gym, we are in the world economy. We are entering into free trade agreement after free trade agreement, and we're telling our community that we have to be globally competitive. We've got to go out there, be agile, be flexible, and go in there and compete. But we're being asked to compete. We are being asked to compete with one, if not two hands tied behind our back. One, if not two hands tied behind our back.
That's right.
Yeah, sorry, the member for Griffiths is a very distracting person.
Please continue.
So what we see, but if we look at the people that we are competing with, if we're looking at the people that we're entering into trade agreements with, we can see that we're not going to be on a level playing field. And I'm not now talking about the asymmetry that is fundamental to virtually every trade agreement that this current government has entered into, but rather because that fundamental infrastructure that we have is falling increasingly behind the other nations. The gap is getting bigger. So we might be doing better than we did last year, but we're not catching up to the rest of the world. Indeed, the reverse is the case. And we have to worry about how our competitors are doing. It's not like being in the gym. It is a very, very different proposition, because our architects, our engineers, our boiler makers, everyone is competing globally for work. And if we don't have that infrastructure, we're just not going to be in the game. And sometimes I think that we forget this is not just about manufacturing, although it's very critical for manufacturing. But I see in my electorate, I see increasingly that work in the services that we're all being told. We've been told the great spruiking of the trade agreements. Oh well, we might be losing manufacturing because we've got so many other things to go, you mate. I mean, the problem is you're too big a target, and we can't actually get enough guns out to hit every one of those. So we're just going for the bullseye. We're going for the bullseye, and my God, has it worked? Has it worked? Have we not pared back? Well, I have personal considerations. It doesn't mean that for 1 minute I lack the commitment to this cause, and I lack the view that your side can be beaten. And each day that I'm in here, the clearer I am that that the great promise of the Prime Minister just simply hasn't materialised. And indeed, if anything, it is worse, because we are absolutely rudderless. We've got this sort of A-lister steering the ship, but he doesn't want to get his hands dirty by putting his hand on the steering wheel. Or maybe it's because he's got people holding his hands off the steering wheel. I've got 3.5 minutes to go, and I will tell you this. I will tell you about but it's actually very germane to this big problem, because we were waiting and seeing, and then we got envious that Labor had actually got this right. Labor had understood the 21st century, it had understood the future that was coming at us, but Malcolm Turnbull had to compromise. He had to get this silly fibre to the node based on the most inferior copper infrastructure. We talk about Turnbullistan, the land of the great, bright, shiny, high-velocity copper. That is not. It's Turnbullistan. Turnbullistan is the land of the bright, shiny copper. Well, I can tell you, out in my electorate, the member for Griffith's electorate, the member for Cunningham's electorate, the copper, and I know in particular in your electorate that the copper is anything but bright and shiny. It's falling apart, and when it rains, in certain streets near my office, you can't even get a voice call. And we are going to be running, apparently, 25 megs down this copper network that can't even take a voice call when it rains. So I just say to you, once again, I'll conclude by going back to my first point. Don't come into this House, members. Don't come into this House and said you had 6 years and this what you did. We started from ground zero. We had an idea. We prosecuted that idea. We got the NBN Co entrenched, and we started that process. Now you've come in. You've proceeded with the contracts that we had already let. But what you are doing now is putting in place a second-class piece of infrastructure that within 10 years will have to be replaced. It is a great tragedy.